School board microphone check. School board microphone check. go.
Hi, Heidi. Good afternoon. The time is 1 minute after 4. The Wayzata Public Schools Board of Education work session for June 24th, 2024 will please come to order. Let's go around the table for roll call introduction, starting to my right at the end.
Dan Ginestra.
Sheila Pryor.
Heidi Cater.
Chase Anderson.
Sarah Johansson.
Valentina Ayers.
Paras Bende.
And I'm Milind Sohoni. Thank you and welcome, everyone. First, we have the teaching and learning reports from Dana Miller and her colleagues. Dana is the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, and she will introduce her colleagues and the presentation.
Sorry about that. I wasn't in position yet, so that used to start with me. But yes, we are here tonight to do the QComp report, and I'm actually going to turn it over to Director Holliday along with her guest and let them do the report, and then I'll be here to answer questions as needed.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Solveig Heraday, of Equity and Inclusion, and in that work and in my partnership with Teaching and Learning and my past experience as a peer coach, I actually am very connected to our peer coaching program. And every year we share a little bit with you about this program that has existed for over a decade in our district, supporting our teachers and improving their practice through all of the insights and wisdoms that they bring. And we leverage that wisdom through the work of their colleagues. And so to share more about that, we have two of our peer coaches with you this evening or this afternoon. We have Lauren Sabota Paxton and Kiran Zaman, and they're going to be coming up here and sharing, but we are still going to be present and available for additional questions.
Hi there, I'm Lauren. Previously coming from Central Middle School, this will be my second year peer coaching, proudly serving Gleason Lake Elementary and a couple departments at the high school.
And my name is Kiran Zaman. I'm currently peer coaching at Birchview, Kimberly Lane, and Oakwood.
Get this going. All right, just wanted to start with a mission statement that we collectively worked on this fall. To create more of a unified vision to improve our clarity of purpose for the staff that we serve. We want to make sure that it is truly reflective of the peer coaching process and how it is meaningful to all the staff that we serve. Our mission states that we are to cultivate a culture of continuous self-directed learning and growth among our staff through coaching partnership that focuses on reflective conversations rooted in collected data, with the ultimate goal of positively impacting student achievement and experience. I want to just highlight that a lot of our work is driven on data collection, and we'll kind of explain what that looks like and provide some examples. And also, when we talk about staff, it's not just classroom staff. It's or classroom teachers. It's all of the staff that support and getting creative on how we can continue to support them as well. Next page. Part of where our mission kind of wraps up talks about the student experience and leading our work with teachers in the student experience. This past spring, we had our peer coaching survey, and we have a couple of verbatims from our coachees regarding the student experience under the question of confidential conversations with my peer coach allow me to. So we have two examples of things that teachers wrote word for word, and I was curious if anybody would be willing to read the first bullet point. Awesome. Thank you, Heidi.
Try new things in my classroom. So, confidential conversations with my peer coach allow me to try new things in my classroom and receive honest feedback on how students are feeling about my class and their engagement.
Awesome. Thank you. The second bullet point.
I can do the next one. Confidential conversations with my peer coach allow me to authentically reflect and hone in on what I really need to focus on as an educator to best support students.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And a lot of the work that we did this year with our teachers, or the goals that they chose for our support in, were around our building goals and our student experience goals. And so helping them collect that data to do just that. So ways that we accomplished this throughout the year, and we will continue to grow in our practices with our teachers, include personalizing professional growth. That their experience working with us is really providing the personalized growth that they desire to build their capacity in. Creating safe spaces and taking risks and reflecting on professional practices. Maintaining supportive and confidential coaching relationships, and recognizing that in our 3 years working with these staff that will continue to grow and deepen. Learning alongside colleagues with varying roles and experiences, and actualizing our commitment to equity through individual coaching, as well as supporting PLCs throughout the year. All right. You want to click. So I just read through a series of things that we as peer coaches have really focused our work and teachers with. And as that text was read to you, I want you just to be invited into something that we've been working with teachers, and that is our culturally responsive protocols. Our culturally responsive protocols that teachers have begun practicing throughout the year, or trying in new ways with content that they've already been teaching with, is all around the different ways that students learn. And so in the top right corner, you will see people bonds, sociocentric versus autonomous. This protocol called Say Something is going to be more of a sociocentric protocol. And then conversational patterns, either verbal overlap, or linear. Recognizing that our students need that variety throughout the day, and helping teachers put this into practice, and possibly do some data collection around this. This might be an opportunity, providing an example of what a protocol would look like. This would be an opportunity to put that into practice. And so this Say Something protocol would be a sociocentric in people bonds, and linear in conversational patterns. So I'm going to show you the text again. I already read it out loud. I want you, as they are displayed on the screen, to think about, go ahead, to think about your experience in working with a coach in any capacity in your life, and how these elements, or which of these elements, might have played a role in creating a positive experience for growth for you. So again, just to model what this might look like in a classroom, a teacher could provide the text, or read the text, or watch something, and allow students to pause, to think, to write maybe what that prompting question about how these elements may have played a role in their life, and then take a moment to share those thoughts and listen carefully to others. So again, something like this with the text provided might allow be an opportunity for teachers to put something like this culturally responsive protocol into practice. So as we switch over, oh no, I think I have one more slide, but if you would just take a moment to look through those, read through those, think about what that might look like. Should we share out, or? Do you want to give them a chance to try? Cool, awesome. So we'll just take a moment or two, if you wouldn't mind reading through those 5 bullet points on your own and thinking about a time when any of those elements may have played a role in creating a positive growth experience for you. Okay. Part of this also, the protocols, is a turn and talk, which allows you time to practice your thoughts before sharing out to others. So let's turn and talk to your elbow buddy. And so that would be the person sitting next to you. And just take a moment to maybe read through one that connects with you, and then we'll share out in about 35 seconds. All right, we'll give you about 10 seconds to wrap up your thinking. Awesome. I'm looking forward to hearing what maybe one or two of you have to share with us.
Yeah, I'll go first. So the creating safe spaces to take risks and reflect on professional practice. So that is something I can relate through my professional experience. And the example that I was sharing was whenever we execute on any strategy, our leadership team always gives us that flexibility. So the focus is on outcome, not how you get there. Now, there are guardrails, and obviously you can't go rogue, but the intent is, hey, this is where we want to go. Tell us more. So the good thing, what I've seen, and again, with multiple leadership teams, thankfully, that I've been with, they'll always value opinions, and they'll ask good questions, pros and cons, but typically I've not seen somebody forcing it. They'll always say, this is what we want to accomplish. Let's talk, let's find out better ways. So it's not about, hey, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm your boss, I don't know what to do, nothing like that. It's just how best can we do it, knowing sort of the circumstances and scenarios around us and how to get there the best way. So that kind of resonates well with me.
In that safe space.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Any more?
Well, certainly, I remember, in your class, we would have a few environments for, let's say, like group work. So we would kind of be placed in students who we might, work the best with, learn the best with. And then there was also the self-paced units you'd have us do. And so it kind of was that spectrum of you're doing a lot of group work, or it's kind of on you to, self-motivate and get the task done.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Well, we'll go on to kind of a transition in our presentation. Just wanting to make sure that you see that the work that we've done embodies, and we'll continue to show some examples of the professional development vision created by Teaching and Learning with Equity and Inclusion, as well as the Superintendent's Office. And the interconnectedness between some examples of work that we've done with staff throughout the year and these elements that you see on your screen, putting our reflection and our work into action with teachers.
So one of the ways that we have worked on this year is by continuing to streamline goal setting, and in particular, trying to do that across the district and at different levels. So at the beginning of the year, each building or site created their academic student goals, as well as student experience goals. And then PLCs also created goals. And one of our goals was to very visually for our teachers, as well as for the building itself, to see that streamline of how do you go from setting building site goals, connecting those to your PLC goals, and then what does that look like for you as an individual within that PLC, within that larger community of your school. And so as you can see on that visual, we gave teachers lots of ways to think about how they can individually connect with their PLC and SMART goal. That personalization, that individualization is really important in that role, and making sure that teachers can really choose, make choices for themselves as to how they want to direct their own learning and growth during the year, as well as to keep connected with those, the PLC and site goals. So it's both the connected and the autonomous together. These were then supported by, so whatever options a teacher might choose, they then would come up with some data collection ideas. We would support them in that work towards their goal, ultimately again being for student growth. I think on your, I think you have in front of you, just around the table, some examples of data collection ideas that teachers might take. Some of those teachers have come up with themselves. Some of them we've offered to them, but if you want to take a quick look, those are just a sample of the many different ways any teacher can really dig into the personalization of what they want to grow in this year, in any given year. Go ahead. So one example of that happening in action was from one of the teams that I worked with this year, and that was a 5th grade PLC. And so their SMART goal that they set at the beginning of the year was as follows. They hoped that 80% of students will be able to independently apply the essential skill for each unit of CCC at the end of each unit on an exit slip by May 1st, 2024. So what you really see here is a teacher team that has thought really deeply and worked deeply about what they individually really see as the value based on the standards of the work they want to do. They came together as a team to come up with a goal for themselves. And the work that I did with them during the year then is helping them implement some of those pieces. So for example, one of the first things that they did is we set up peer observations. So the teachers on that PLC would observe one another and see what are the practices my PLC member is doing in the classroom. How can I learn from them? What are they doing that is really working for all of their students? And what can I take from that to my classroom? And as vice versa. We then came together in a reflection meeting, and really as a peer coach, my goal was to ask the questions that would help them have that reflective conversation about what is working and how are they doing towards this goal. They then did individual observations with me, and I collected data for them in different ways based on what they individually wanted to do, maybe somewhat different from their PLC, but also in that collected, ultimate collected goal, connected goal. And then we again reflected, how did that go? How did that piece? What do you see that is working well for you? What is something that you want to keep working on? How is this goal? How's your work toward this goal going? In that final conversation, something that did come up is not only teachers celebrating the growth that they've made as individuals and as teams, but also thinking about shifting mindsets. So as you notice, this goal, this team set was 80%. And one of the things that came up in our conversations near the end of the year is, well, we saw huge success with a lot of the moves that we made. Right? We're actually seeing students reach 100% of our students are meeting these goals through the actions we're taking, and that team seeing that increasing throughout the year. And so by the end of the year, part of the conversation was and it came up organically in that team, why don't we set 100% goals? Why can't we aim for 100% of students being able to independently apply? And so that's part of that shifting mindsets for teachers, for coaches ourselves, is how can we make sure that each time we really do aim for that 100%, all students. And so some of that piece is really that collective efficacy here. These again are survey responses from teachers to that question, confidential conversations with my peer coach allow me to, in terms of that collective efficacy, and that being a really powerful piece here, having, as we know from John Hattie's work, one of the greatest impacts on students is that collective efficacy when teachers work with that connected goal. And so maybe we'll ask you again if two people can volunteer to read out what did our teachers say related to this.
Confidential conversations with my peer coach allow me to, this year, I was able to work with a colleague to reflect together on practices we use with students. Our peer coach was there to facilitate the conversation, but reflecting with a colleague was a valuable learning opportunity. I appreciate the flexibility in the program.
I can read the second one. Being able to observe other teachers teaching the same lesson and then collaborating and processing with them has been valuable for me and has had a positive effect on student learning.
Thank you both for reading that. So as you can hear from our teachers, some of the things that they really value is that personalization as well as the flexibility that peer coaches can take with them to really focus on what they want to work on for the ultimate benefit of all of their students through process and cycles of reflection, data collection, again, always aiming for student academic achievement as well as student experience. We didn't want to just ask our teachers to do that. We want to always model and live that as well as peer coaches ourselves as we continue to grow and reflect. And so earlier at the beginning of this year, we set a PLC SMART goal, and our SMART goal was about how we help teachers build that greater sense of self-efficacy for themselves so that they can continue to grow. So we set a SMART goal, this was ours, through the use of cognitive coaching practices and a script that clearly communicates the meaning of the rubric. At least 50% of staff will self-evaluate as distinguished on that rubric in order to identify the value of our conversation impacting teacher actions. So I'll break that down just a little bit. That rubric that you see is a self-evaluation rubric that teachers fill out at the end of the year based on how they're feeling that as they reflect on their own growth. And so in that distinguished category, you can see staff are really thinking about that can really think about the impact on student learning based on the collective work that they've done with their PLC and what are those action steps that they've taken. You'll notice that we also set a 50% goal. Some PLC members did take that autonomous route of 100%, others took different percentages, but we really discussed this in depth at the end of the year, and we also shifted our mindsets as a PLC. Why don't we aim for supporting 100% of our teachers, and why don't we aim for that, right? Can't we get all of them to really get into that self-reflective place where they really see the value of effective PLC collaboration? So we're growing as well in our goals. I think it's on to you. Oh, one more.
One more.
Yeah. So I apologize. So one of the ways that this was put into place, I think you hear this again from teachers, that survey at the end of the year, confidential conversations with my peer coach allow me to. Could we ask you, three of you again, to read them out?
I can go with the first one. So confidential conversations with my peer coach allow me to think deeply about the ways in which I can improve my practice. These conversations allow me to be frank and honest about the ways that I can improve.
I can read the second one. Try new things without being judged, which sparks more creativity and outside-the-box thinking.
Can go the next. Feel confident as a teacher and feel like there is someone who has my best interest in mind and who is devoted to helping me grow as a teacher in a non-judgmental way.
Thank you so much for reading. I think the common theme that we have heard from teachers is that safe space where they can really grow in ways they want to grow in, and with our support, and really getting a better sense of self-efficacy. What do they have control over, and what can they actually do and put into place?
Thank you. What is helping drive some of that opportunity for growth with our staff is supporting staff with those culturally responsive protocols, as well as professional development that we have done through interdependent learning and the basic needs. So PLC collaboration has been around planning and effectiveness of these different protocols. observations and data collections for responsible or culturally responsive protocols used within classrooms, discussing how basic needs are a function of behavior and how that appears in the classroom, as well as aligning instructional choices with students' needs. So you'll see some diagrams there of things that we have shared with our staff throughout the year. And yeah, go ahead. Additional partnership that we have done as peer coaches to support what our teachers need from us. We've done a lot of work with our literacy coaches, our family partnership leads, family circles, and our EL staff. In particular with literacy coaches, we've included them into a lot of our observations, the pre and post meetings throughout the year. One example that I was a part of was creating a literacy rotation group for fourth graders and helping to collect data around student conversation and student voice in those literacy rotation groups, and helping teachers, the fourth grade teachers, find success in trying new things with their literacy coach. Additionally, integrating some of the Orton Gillingham training with CCC for kindergarten phonics, partnership supporting use of strategies from the Tier 2 Literacy Toolkit and the responsive classroom instruction. And again, leaning into collaboration with principals and family partnership leads so that we can support the teachers that we work with what they might need for that personalized professional growth.
So in addition to the work that we've done with teachers this year, we of course want to keep growing, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about what else can we do and what do we need to do, again, ultimately in order to serve all of our students best. And so here are a few of the things that we are looking forward to in the coming years. One of them is encouraging staff to embrace opportunities for support, to reach out and access support, such as through us, but not just us, and also one another through challenges. Challenges will come, and so how can we help staff really embrace those challenges? Helping teachers see the power of focusing on their circle of control, street data, and what's actually actionable at any given time. Helping teachers build flexibility in their responsiveness to student needs. Encouraging staff to shift mindsets, aiming for that 100% in our SMART goals so that all students are really considered as let's aim for 100%. Continue deepening connectedness across teams and roles, so that streamlining piece, continuing that and strengthening it. And finally, again, building self-efficacy through greater transparency of the program. How can we start next year really being clear about how this program has evolved and changed in ways that better supports them and, again, ultimately our students. And so bringing it back to what this is all for, what we are here as a peer coach team for, what I know we are all sitting in this room for is our students. Again, that survey, hearing from 3 different teachers and how confidential conversations with their peer coaches allow them to. Do we want to read that?
I will read one.
Okay.
And you can read.
There we go.
Awesome. Again, embracing the student experience, confidential conversations have allowed teachers to talk about student needs and how best to help them succeed. These conversations have also been a part of the encouragement received to try new things.
Another teacher stated, these confidential conversations with my peer coach allow me to reflect on my lessons and review or evaluate student work and determine needs and brainstorm strategies for meeting those needs.
And lastly, confidential conversations with my peer coach have allowed me to see how the students were able to reach the learning. We talked about different learning styles within my classroom and how to allow each student to learn as they need.
Thank you so much for your time and for listening. And yes, thank you.
Well, yes, thank you both, and thank you Solveig, thank you Dana. Colleagues, have any questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for that presentation. So every school is different and has unique needs and unique goals. And are there things that could be, how when they find something that is really working, are there ways that this can be shared between schools?
Go ahead.
So I love that question because that's part of what a lot of my work has been this year. Some of my work has been this year is I'm at 3 different schools. And so I feel so lucky to see 3 different cultures and 3 different ways while we're all aiming for the same thing. And so one of the things that that we have done is work in thinking about, cross-district, right? Let's say I'm working with the 5th grade PLC, connecting that 5th grade PLC and saying, well, what about connecting with your partner, your other PLC over at these other schools? Or suggesting, I've seen this teacher do this thing. What do you think about that? What would you like to try? Connecting with principals is another piece where we're really thinking about how can we really see how peer coaches can connect with principals to gain some of that, make that more streamlined and have a structure in place to allow that to happen more.
Yeah, so I have the similar question along that line. So as we look at the data, I mean, it's a very valuable data. And year over year, that data is going to change, it's going to grow. So where do you store that data and how do you leverage sort of the historical trend and how do you do that data analysis? Because based on, again, what I'm understanding is, yes, if you talk to different PLCs, great. I mean, you can share, but then we are limited to you, right? How do we take it across all buildings and at all levels? And what do we see in elementary versus middle school? And what do we see in middle school that we need to change in elementary? How do you manage that data, or what's the idea or thought process?
I can start with that if you want to add anything. We too PLC throughout the week, and so we are collaborating every week. So we are often sharing strategies that worked well, or this is what we saw as ideas to continue that learning in other buildings. So we're collaborating. We might also see some collaboration with the data. I want to go back to that too. I'm thinking of a particular person that I worked with earlier in the year that wanted to see this data grow throughout the year. So the data that we collect, we have saved, we have shared with the teachers. And because we will work with these teachers for hopefully 3 years, we will be able to continue to work on what we've started and the data that we've started collecting. And like I said, I'm thinking of a 1st grade teacher who wanted to work on the circle practices with her students and having students find more ownership within their roles in that circle practice. And so data that I collected in the fall and then again in the spring has built off of each other. So working and having relationships with teachers over multiple years, I think helps bring that data to life and continue the growth that they've started. And then again, collaborating amongst the peer coaches and sharing things that have been effective or what would be most effective. Yeah, like in that situation and how we can share that and working together.
Yeah, and I see under new practices, obviously you guys are leveraging all the technology aspect of it. So I would highly recommend connecting with Director Wade, because whenever I see ChatGPT and any of those technologies, there is a lot that you can leverage sort of to decipher that data, to mine that data. So anything that technology team can help, I think you should get help from them, because that will help tremendously.
And additionally, because of the connection to that the peer coach program has with both teaching and learning and equity and inclusion, and then the directors and leadership in that space, any trends and themes, we're hearing about that. We're a part of that piece to also help make those connections across the district. And that was something in the last few years too, with all of our built site visits, was yet one more place to have that connectivity. And to that point, our peer coaches, many of them were connected to built at their site level as well. And so we're hearing some of the broader trends from that community, able to share that between buildings, bringing that back to the team, us being able to process what are the trends that we're hearing across the district and what is the support that's needed. So that constant sort of conversation loop has lots of tentacles is a way that we're also making sure that things are not getting either forgotten or lost.
And I think specifically that data point. As you saw from the professional learning framework, that equity and inclusion in teaching and learning, along with all of our leadership, so that is specialized services, technology, everybody leans into that work. And so peer coaching doesn't happen in isolation from CEL, from built teams, from any of the work happening, from a curriculum adoption. That's all very tightly together. And then we are ultimately looking for the results in student achievement, right? And so to that end, one of the things we have been doing is looking at a data system that we'll be able to use across, I'm going to use the word system too much, but that we'll be able to use across the system so that we're able to track student gains and where we're seeing those gains. And so how do you merge that assessment data, both formative, summative, satellite, or street, however you want to refer to the data? How can we look at that and look at that across an E12 plus system? And so we are in the process of doing that. We'll be looking to pilot a system this year for full implementation with our fingers crossed in the 25-26 school year, so that we can then pinpoint and say, this work we're doing in professional learning, knowing that teachers are our greatest resource, principals next, is making a difference in this student achievement, and really be able to tie those things more directly together.
Great, thank you.
I am a big fan of examples, and I would like to ask you to bring an example. Knowing that many schools, if you grab third graders, they are struggling because for some obvious reasons. I have a question. Can you bring an example when you, at one school, saw there are some certain struggles with in literacy, particularly with third graders? What helped in one school you were able to bring during leadership conversation to bring to a different school, and what did work out?
Yeah, I think we actually have an example from one of our fellow peer coaches about that literacy work. Let me just make sure that I have the right one. So there was another PLC that worked with their, that really aligned with their, the peer coach that they had and their literacy coach. So they combined that and they created together a learning opportunity around a fluency rubric. So really thinking about reading fluency as a whole, and how to respond to that instructionally. So that team with that peer coach and the literacy coach combined came up with that rubric. And the peer coach's role in that was that the peer coach, the teacher actually recorded fluency videos as they worked with students, and then self-assessed on the rubric, right, and where that student was. And then students practiced with that test recording themselves. The peer coach then collected some of that data when students were practicing in place. So that's one example, if I'm understanding correctly, of a peer coach, our role being that data collection and then that connected, that piece. That was shared, like I think Lauren, you mentioned, in our PLCs every Friday. We share consistently every week that we met. We would share, what did you see? What have you seen teachers doing? What are some of the data collection methods that have been working well? Especially as we follow up with that staff later in the year and do another round, coming back to those successes. So that's one example. It was another 5th grade PLC that worked with that. And so we shared that during our PLC as well.
I just want to say thank you for coming in and sharing with us the action of professional development. Sometimes it's seen as a noun, and this really shows the true action that goes behind it and all the intensive work that really comes along with it. And I also want to say thank you for bringing a commitment and action towards our equity commitment. Whenever we talk about each and every student, seeing that mind shift that you talked about from 80% to 100% of students, thank you so much for that. I know that's a lot of work, and it's really impressive to me that that's part of what came through the work. So I appreciate that very much.
If nobody else, thank you. Again, thank you all for that. I completely agree with Heidi. Just the fact that you are confident enough to change that 80% to 100% or 50 to 100% speaks volumes about how comfortable you are with this process and how confident you are that things will change. I have a kind of a related question, two questions that are interrelated. Pardon me if this has already been presented here and I missed it, or if you have presented this in the past, please refresh my memory. How many peer coaches are there in the Wayzata School District, number one? Number two, are these handpicked or is there a process you follow to pick those?
I can get started, and Dana might chime in. So this past year, we had 7 full-time peer coaches. I peer coached back in 2017, 18. And at that time, we were around 13 peer coaches and were seeking to grow. And COVID hit and changed a lot of things. And so we are also down in numbers in order to fund those positions. So it is a smaller contingent than it used to be, 7 peer coaches. I believe that next year, I think we're right around that. Yeah, 7, 8 peer coaches. And then in terms of the process for hiring, it's actually a very formal process that's even written into our teacher contract. And so we partner with teacher representatives, administrative representatives, union representatives to go through a formal interview process where teachers in our district apply to become peer coaches. And then that team collectively determines who from the candidates is the best fit for the next year to join the cohort. And they, peer coaches are coaches for 3 years.
So there is a method to the madness. Thank you.
There is.
And then in addition to those 7, because we are so short on numbers, we have a really hard time managing the caseload. And as we continue to grow in students and staff, we haven't grown since I've been here in peer coaching. And so the teaching and learning staff also got trained in cognitive coaching, and we're just doing some double dipping right now. And so people like Becky Kittleson from Equity and Inclusion, Cassie, Grace, pretty much the entire team at Teaching and Learning also take a very small caseload in peer coaching. And 2 things, it helps take pressure off of our peer coaches, and maybe they can pick up some folks that have different needs like counselors, nurses, that type. But also it gets our teaching and learning staff staying in the classroom and embedded deeply in the work. And so sometimes if we're doing, say, CCC training, then some of our, like a MyWin may go do peer coaching and somebody implementing that, so that we're also seeing the work, and that kind of helps feed that feedback loop as well. So that's just been something that we have done because of the numbers, but truthfully has proven to be a really nice connection. And so sometimes, lemons and lemonade, right? And so we were able to get a bonus, I think, out of that in teaching and learning. It's a really important way for both of our teams to stay connected to the work personally as well.
Thank you very much, all of you. Any more questions, comments? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have superintendent's reports, and Dr. Anderson will introduce Dr. Ray Queener of TeamWorks, and Dr. Queener will present the guiding change document review and input for the attendance boundary adjustment process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Dr. Queener, welcome back. Good to see you here. I'll just give a little bit of background while you're getting set up and ready to roll on the process thus far. So as the board and our staff are familiar with the fact, we are on the front end of doing a review of our enrollment, student enrollment within the district, and also doing some preliminary work for preparing for reviewing and making some considered changes to our school attendance areas. And we've had a few steps along the way, including a small subgroup that met and had conversations about some of the preliminary discussions on what the process might look like. And then recently, we convened with Dr. Queener with our SLT, our strategy leadership team, or my cabinet, and talked through a little bit about the process and the work that we've done thus far, the work of that small subgroup, and reviewed what's called a guiding change document. So I think the board has had some work with that and some familiarity with it. Essentially, it kind of establishes the current reality and the means by which we will take a look at this process and the desired end result, or what it is that we're hoping to move forward with this process. So we have a draft of that guiding change document that I think we're going to work through a little bit here today, as well as receiving some of the other background information. And I believe it's the intent, but again, Dr. Queener will be giving us some background and feedback on next steps, but I believe it'll be the intent to bring that guiding change document to the July board meeting for school board action. So tonight will be an opportunity for you to weigh in, offer your inputs and thoughts on the component parts of that. And along the way, we'll continue to reflect back on that document. And in the event that something of notoriety evolves through the process where we think we might need to tweak that guiding change document, again, I think it's my understanding that we would bring that back to the board for additional input and guidance and or possible reapproval of a modified guiding change document. So with that, I'm going to quit talking like I know everything about this process, because I don't, but fortunately we have somebody here who does. So I'm going to turn it over to Ray and let him work us through the materials he's put together, and give the board an opportunity to provide their input. Thanks so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be back with you. I just looked, it was about a month ago, I came and presented an overview of the process. Tonight, we're going to touch on the process again. I know you haven't had much to do in the last month or so, it'd be good to revisit that. And then we want to talk about the guiding change document this evening. As Dr. Anderson mentioned, at the July meeting, you'll be asked to act on two things, actually. The guiding change, which is actually putting the parameters around the process, and the adoption of the process. And those two are important actions, and I'll tell you kind of how and why they come together for our TeamWorks process. We have backward mapped the process. You see a macro level here starting on page 3 that gets us through all of our work and brings a recommendation to the board in November. We reserve a backup date in December should something come up that's unexpected. So the goal was to have a decision by the board on boundaries by the end of the calendar year. And so this mapping does that. I also want you to know underneath this is a very detailed project map that maps out every step of the way, who's doing what when, who from our team has got responsibilities. So I didn't think the board wanted that level of detail, but this is a macro map that gets us through a decision in November, December at the latest. Let me just, do you want me to pause as I go through? Is that okay? Is there questions on the timing or the mapping of this so far? All right. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking again about the process. Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Queener. Can you go back to the previous slide? Is there a reason why the November and December timelines are not highlighted? I mean, may not be any reason, but just...
They are your dates. They're already scheduled. The yellow highlights are, in this map, we didn't have specific days picked. So that
okay.
It was a to be. The project map underneath this has the specific dates. We're still reconciling between the district and my calendar.
Okay. Okay. So the highlighted ones don't have dates. They just have the month.
Yeah, yes.
Got it. Okay, got it. Thank you.
So in the decision-making framework that we use, and again, I'll highlight a few things, but there's a couple of places where it's really important to understand the nuance of this process. The governance decision in this process is to determine the boundary changes. That's a board decision. And so you are the choice maker. You have both the authority and the responsibility to make the choice. That's not always the case in the decision-making process, but for this one, the board is the choice maker. And what this process will do is it will utilize what we call a design team. And the design team's job is to take your guiding change document, as well as all the data that we collect, and generate options. And those options then are offered to a stakeholder group or an input team to give feedback on those options. And the iteration that you see in the top center of the graphic, the shared understanding, we will iterate that a couple of times as we refine the options. The goal of this is to bring you, ideally, to options that comply with your guiding change document. As Dr. Anderson already mentioned, if there's something that does come up where it was unforeseen or unexpected, we would come back and say we might need to revise our guiding change document, because we want to bring you two options that you could pick from that comply with the direction of the board. So rule number one in this process is that when the board gets those options, your action is one of two things: to either accept one of the options or reject both. If the board at the board table tweaks options, you undo all of the engagement and the stakeholder involvement of the process. And so it's really important for the board to know and understand that that's a key part of this. Because if you do that, you'll never do this process again. It'll be hard to get people to volunteer for that. So we want you to go into that knowing what to expect. The second rule that happens is for the design team, when you get feedback, whether that's from the input team or from the community via the survey or website or however we're doing that, something has to change in the options. You can't take those same two options back to the team again. It doesn't mean that everything gets incorporated, but something has to change. And what we see in that process is that what that tells your interested parties in the district is that you're listening, you're considering their voice, and to the degree possible, incorporating it in the options. So those are the two rules: RAISE rules, Teamworks rules, however you want to look at them. But we want you to know that going in before acting. Once the board makes a decision, then it's up to the staff to implement well. And so they will implement the process. So let me pause again. Questions on the process? I know we went over it in detail a month ago.
I do have a question. Is it ever, so we'll get two options in the end, right? Or they're moving forward with two options, is what you said. Is there ever a time when there ends up being just one option? And so we're not having to pick from two because something has resonated with everyone?
Yeah, the goal is to bring two, but that doesn't always work out. Okay. And I worked with a district that ended up with one that came forward. As hard as we tried, there just really wasn't another scenario or option that would exist. So then the process is the same. The board accepts or rejects. But it's nice if you have a couple of variations, but it may not work out that way.
Okay, thank you.
When we are brought the options and say, for example, we reject them and it goes back, I mean, it seems like you're not looking for, recommendations. I presume, though, you'd want to know why it was rejected, and then it would go back, and then, I don't know, I guess can you provide clarity on what that would look like if we were to reject something?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And because my presentation was fairly black and white, and that's not the process, because the board is involved and engaged through the process. It's not like we're waiting till November to bring you something that you haven't seen or heard about. In my experience, board members generally will be hearing from the public, you'll be hearing from constituents. In a process like this, you'll be getting all the reports from the input team and the survey data. So you're gonna have a lot of information. And we make sure that the superintendent sits on the design team as the connector between the board and the design options. And so if there are things that you hear or think about, you can contribute in that way. We just don't have board members sit on the design team as the choice maker, because you can influence the process. So it won't be, you won't be surprised, you shouldn't be surprised at what comes forward in November. Does that answer?
That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Queener, I have a related question. So board members should not be surprised, but you're saying the board members will be cognizant of what's going on, some of the data, some of the designs. So the board members have to keep quiet until November, December before they can speak up or say anything, or?
We ask you to share if you have comments or feedback, to share it through the superintendent.
Okay.
So he brings that to the design team as consideration.
Okay. So before November, we can also give our feedback. Okay, good. Thank you.
So every time we go to the input team, there'll be a very lengthy report with data and options that you'll have an opportunity to review. And if there are ideas or thoughts, that's when they're shared. But the vehicle is to get it to the design team for their consideration. So we ask that when people share ideas, it's for consideration, not a directive.
Thank you.
I might just add one quick thing too about design and input teams, just to give a little more background on that. So we pulled up the list of our leadership council team, and we assigned all of our leadership council team members to either the design team or the input team, and then gave consideration, I think, to some additional staff that may not be on that specific team, but may have some unique insight or offer some assistance from that perspective. The design team is a pretty finite group of, 20 or 25 maybe. The input team will include the other half of our leadership council crew, and will also be some staff and parents from each of our school buildings and different program areas. And they'll provide that input in large group setting with 2 or 3 meetings, perhaps. Is that about the right amount? And then there will be opportunities for small group work within that larger group. So there could be, 50 to 70, maybe, I don't know how many total would be part of that input team.
I think we are at between 70 and 80 right now.
Okay. So that would be a pretty good sized group and a pretty well-represented group to be able to give consideration to the design options and provide input with really good representation. So I thought I would just share that to add a little bit more. That might be coming up with more of the presentation or further down the road, but I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. You're one step ahead, as always. So the input team, the goal is to have a representative group from the entire district. So balance across the district, across the schools. For staff, we want a balance of disciplines. We want to represent our population to the degree possible. And it takes, a fair amount of work. It's actually really hard to get, especially parents now, to step in and volunteer for a couple of nights because everyone's busy. And so we will rely on principals to help identify folks. One of the things that we watch for voice. And we make sure that if we are not hearing from a constituent group that's a core part of the district, that we find alternative ways to reach out. And so we do create the online opportunity. That is one way. We will offer, if there is a need for translation, we'll offer those as well. But if we're still not hearing, sometimes some folks don't want to come into the schools, and so we have to go to where they are. And it may not be me. It may be a staff member from the school district that has got a connection with a community already. But the important part is that we want to provide an opportunity to get all voices heard. So we will, if we need to take extra steps to do that, we will make sure we do that. The other piece about the input team is that the way we do our process, even though we'll have 80 people in the room, we put them in small groups of typically 5 at a table. And we use the small group setting to brainstorm from each other, different thoughts and ideas, but everybody's individual voice is maintained. So if I have a specific comment or concern about a option, my voice is recorded. So we don't have to come to consensus in the small group. We just use it as a idea generator. So ideation, maybe that's a better word. Ideation of different concerns and strengths of the proposal. So we work hard to maintain voice. All right, any other questions? All right, well, as they say, now on to the main event. So tonight, we want to give the board an opportunity to add to, refine a draft guiding change document that we've been working on. And as a quick reminder, the guiding change is basically looking at, on the left-hand side, your current context and reality. So why are we embarking upon this endeavor? What are the key elements that we need to know? What's driving the need for this change? And then we go to the far right and we say, what are the desired outcomes? What are the results that we want to achieve? The black oval would be things that are off the table, that are non-starters. So that's the unacceptable means. So, and we'll talk about a couple of those. And then what happens in the center of the graphic is the creative process. So how do we go from our current reality to our desired outcomes without violating the unacceptable means and generate options to do so? And so, I think can we switch, Amy, to the... And if you scroll down to the guiding change, that would be great. A little bit more, Amy. One more page, right there. So this is the draft that, as Dr. Anderson mentioned, a small group worked on. We took it to the SLT for some additions and refinement, and we're bringing this to you for your enhancements and refinements as well. As an aside, you are seeing the extent of my graphic design abilities. So as a math teacher, I do everything in boxes and rectangles. So that's the structure. But it's just a simple table that talks about the current reality, the desired outcomes, and then in the center, the not hows. So I think what we would do is we'll take these one at a time, one column at a time, see if the board members have questions, suggestions, or refinements or additions. And I'll give you a little bit to scan through them. I know you had a chance to look previously, but take a quick scan and then we'll open it up. And we'll be in the current reality first. So thoughts, questions, additions?
Okay. Dr. Queener, I have a question about bullet number 4 and 5 for sure. Aren't those, isn't that like a cause and effect? The first 3 bullets are the causes, and 4th and 5th is the effect.
Can you repeat that again?
In the first column, right? In reality. The first 3 bullet points are causing number 4 and number 5, which are the effects of those causes. So, I mean, they can still be there, but that's the way I'm looking at it.
And they're, okay, so first 3 bullets are causing 4 and 5 is what you're saying?
Right.
Am I understanding that?
Right.
Yep. That may be partially true, not unilaterally true, but
okay.
they I mean, many of these are interconnected, and sometimes even in the current reality, the why we're doing it is the opposite is the result we're hoping to get. So they are somewhat related.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you describe what it means? Second to the last bullet point says core areas in schools are at or beyond capacity. Can you help me understand?
So a core area in a school might be a cafeteria, a media center, It's the larger gathering spaces. Core facilities could be restrooms. So there are times where you can add classrooms onto a building, but if your core facilities aren't able to accommodate, it's not going to work.
Yeah, so that's one of my questions, so thank you for asking. Going back to inefficient use of funding, can we quantify that? Because when I was looking at the why, I was looking at the what as well. So I couldn't quite relate, how am I going to measure the outcome? So yes, we can categorize as, inefficient use of funding, but what does that mean, and how would we even draw the perfect picture, if you will, or outcome? So what does that include exactly?
Do you have ideas of what?
Well, so core areas, right? So again, core areas is a broader statement or category, but again, to your point, it's cafeteria, it's the tech ed and those type of things. So when we talk about inefficient use of funding, is it related to, for example, how the teachers are best utilized, or is it because of facilities, like which aspect it touches, or across the board?
Okay, I think I understand now. So and correct me if I'm wrong, but when space dictates how we staff a building, how we put programs in a building, that isn't necessarily always efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we have to put a program in a building because these other two are at capacity, there's no space, that may not be the most efficient use of funding. And I think that's where we were talking from a macro scale. There wasn't a specific, here's an inefficiency and here's an inefficiency.
Okay.
Was there more?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I just think that there are some core staffing variables that are true in all buildings. If we take our 9 elementary schools, for example, we have a building with 450 students and we have one with 850 probably. So they each have one principal, and they each have some support staff consistently, a social worker and a dean of students, or a dean that works in the building. So if you look at, I suppose a way to look at it would be cost per student of having those 3 full-time staff persons are significantly different. So there would be one that would be inefficient. And if you have a building where there might be 4 available / empty classrooms, there's never really truly an empty classroom because they always find a use for them in some capacity. But if there's room for more students, finding that sweet spot of students to staffing can really bring some additional efficiencies.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else in current reality? All right, how about in the desired outcomes, desired results? Questions, additions, refinements?
Can you elaborate a little bit, just a little bit, don't go into too many details. How would you consider prior boundary changes to help you get the desired results for now?
We want to be cognizant of what's happened in the past. And if there, in some situations, and I can't speak specifically to Wayzata because I don't have that history, but in some districts, there's been a neighborhood that's been flipped and flopped multiple times. And so we want to pay attention to that we haven't moved them in and out of different attendance boundaries, either as a group or a neighborhood or a block. So we want to pay attention to that. But at the same time, we're trying to accomplish all the other objectives as well.
I have a question. Kind of along those lines, and it sounds like this might be one that you pay attention to, but is not unacceptable. Not having done this before, I'm sure, I don't know what kinds of things are really hard to do, but something to consider would be fifth graders and eighth graders in their last year at their schools, a way for them not to have to move?
So at some point in the process, we will have to have that conversation. And it depends on the severity or the situation that we're trying to rectify. And so, as an example, I'll exaggerate to illustrate a point. If you make boundary changes, but you let everybody transfer back to the school that they came from, you've really done nothing. And it mitigates that. There are times, though, where you might say a fifth grader finishes in the school they started, if that's a choice the family makes, or they finish in the middle school, if that's a choice they make. And there are some times where districts have said, we're going to grandfather the fifth graders and the eighth graders and their siblings. So all of that has an impact on the capacity and the numbers. So we will have to have those conversations at some point.
Okay. Thank you.
Is this a time to add to a what if we want to?
Yep.
So it sort of builds on what you're saying. So one, along the lines of the provide equitable services for special education, I think my suggestion would be to provide equitable access to out of school time, provide equitable access to services across the board in the buildings. Some examples of this might be access to after school care, and there might be some buildings that have the ability to have transportation routes to some additional childcare centers where other ones don't. Or, in the inefficiencies of staffing, having full-time, being able to give full-time staff to different enrichment and intervention programs where another building might have a part-time person, might just provide some unequal access.
Okay. And to the point where we talked about the special services, are you proposing that within financial?
For sure.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. When possible, I think a person could say, or within financial limitations.
Any objections to that addition? And I think, just to be clear too, the process is about addressing capacities and enrollments. Some of the programming decisions won't be part of the design and input team. It's really, that comes back to the strategic leadership team and other groups in the district. But I think what I hear you saying is we don't want to bring an option that inhibits this type of opportunity. But the design team doesn't get into the grandfathering that you were asking about, or what programs go in what place. That's really an administrative.
Right. And it could be, like provide structures and systems that allow for the maximization of services, for all students or something like that. So as long as,
I'll get a little assistance on the grammar when we're done, but I get the gist of what you're asking.
Thank you.
Dr. Queener, I have a question. So these are not the parameters that the design team is limited to, right? They can add their own, or is that's it? I mean, the board decided that this is what we want, this is what they will stay with.
Yeah, if they have a desired outcome that's not here, that's got to come back to you. So we have to live within the boundaries of what you set as the context. And again, that's why we like the superintendent to be a part of the design team, because that channel or that communication channel is going back and forth.
One input that I would make too is you'll notice that one of the desired results is establish these boundaries for 3 to 5 years. What we'd really hope is that we can get something in place that realistically for us, given the place we're at in our ongoing evolution in the district, hopefully would be some changes that would accommodate up to that point where we may be adding a new school, either elementary or middle school or both, so that we could accommodate students without having to go through another major process until we have that 10th elementary school or 4th middle school or both. And then we would obviously would have to take a look at it again to populate the new school. We've done that before. And oftentimes the year or two before you open a new school, there can be some additional challenges from a crowding perspective, and you can sort of feel the pain, which justifies the need for a new building as well. So I just wanted to share that with you as well, to keep that in mind, that 3 to 5 years is probably a reasonable time frame. Might be 6, or it could be any range in between that, but it's just important to keep in mind.
No, and I'll add to that too, because this question comes up, especially in growing districts, is that we will design options cognizant of the potential future, but not directing the future. So there may be a need for a school at some point in time. We'll be aware or talking about that, but the options aren't going to be designed as if it's going to happen, because you haven't asked the question. We don't have any plans. In one district that we worked with, we knew that they're growing fast in the south. And so the northern schools were built out. There wasn't going to be a lot of change. So we designed them at more closer to capacity with a little room of growth. But the southern schools were designed at capacity. And the public asked questions around that, because we knew that if they built another elementary, it was going to be south of there. So we didn't want kids from the north driving all the way through the district to redo all the boundaries. So we're aware of that, but not directing it in the process, if that makes sense.
I have one question, and this is for my kind of learning in this space. So when we talk about school district boundaries, like you have 1-2 houses in a community, they are in Osceola School District versus everybody else in Wayzata. So those type of district boundaries, is that decided by city, or who decides that? State? Oh, okay. All right.
That's actually, yeah, it's in order to change your district boundaries, you have to have legislative action, and districts have to agree that they're going to change those.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
And it's not easy. When I was in Stillwater, we had to do that with South Washington County because our district boundary ran through the middle of, so we had to move it.
Yeah.
So, but that takes an active legislature.
All right. Thanks.
Here, we're only talking the attendance boundaries, which are in the control of the school district. Anything else in the desired outcomes?
I do have one more.
Yes.
I was debating between in the not how and the desired. And so I'm going to try to frame it in the desired, but it might go in the not how. And the desired is that the desired outcome is to have a system of boundaries where academic achievement is not predicted by zip code or address. And so when I put it in the not now, it would be do not reinforce outcomes that promote predictability by zip code. So maybe it would go in a not, but.
So we're not specifically looking at academics in the design. That might be without another data source, that might be a hard desired outcome. You may offer it as a unacceptable means to knowingly do something that diminishes that, or changes the academic progress. But I don't know that we can achieve commonality across academics by boundary changes.
That makes sense. So it should go in the other one. Okay.
Yeah, I might, that's my initial thinking, is that I might frame it as a not how.
Okay.
Don't create greater discrepancy in process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Is that okay? All right, does that lead us to the not hows? Well, the first one is always the easiest. We're not going to bring you anything that's knowingly or willingly violating law or policy. The second one is a very common not how, and for your district, we put in 45 minutes. So we're not going to put kids on the bus for an hour and a half, even if that was possible for travel. The third one is also a common, that we're not going to create options that create short or long-term financial shortfalls. So we don't want to cause budgetary concerns. And then we just, thank you, Amy, added the one that you just raised that will not create greater discrepancy in process in academics, was what you said, right?
Should we add, Sheila, the point that you brought up, or that is something we don't have to document? So the 5th grader, 8th grader, grandfather. No,
Not at this point.
Okay. Okay.
So we want to design first, and then once we see the models coming out, right now you would be doing that in absence of data. It may not even be an option depending on what options come before the board. It's also guess as to who will choose, if you do grandfathering, who will choose to do that. Some really want if it's their 5th grader, they really would want their 5th grader to stay. But if the sibling can't stay, then do we split the family? And so all of those things we'd have to do some work to figure that out. But that will come in the process. Yes, sir.
Dr. Queener, ideally, I think most of us would like diversity in similar diversity of students in different schools. Would I be correct in saying that is not something we have control over or will have control over because of where people decide to live, right? And because of the restriction of the 45-minute bus ride. So,
yeah, we put the suggestion was to consider the school demographics in the options. And other language that I've used in the past is that we work toward district averages, but we aren't going to design around the district average. So we're paying attention. And when we do all of our modeling, we will look at all the demographics on every option and every move. So we're trying to move toward a district average, but not to so much that we're moving kids from one end of the district to the other from a diversity standpoint. And you're exactly right. I mean, families choose where they're going to live based on a lot of reasons, and sometimes it is, I was working in a district that fairly white and affluent in the north, fairly diverse and lower socioeconomic in the south, and they wanted to balance, and there were families that said, we moved to the south for a reason. And so we want to pay attention to all that. But we're moving toward district average is kind of what we will try to do, and for sure not create any discrepancies or disparities.
I have one comment. So on the note of the bus rides being no longer than 45 minutes one way, something in the past that has come up that was important to this board was that we don't increase the walk zones so that it's, for us, we have a 1 mile walk zone. And so would that be something also that we could consider as making sure that the walk zones are within that 1 mile radius?
The issue is that the transportation routing part of this is what we're looking at. The zones of walking can be changed. So we don't want to create a scenario where your bus service says that in order to get kids from here to there, that we're over that limit. But the walking part of it, I think that's at your discretion anyway, anytime. So we don't want to increase costs on the transportation side of things, but the walking impact, you can decide. That wasn't a very eloquent answer, but.
Well, I'll add to that, right? Because actually conversations within boundary decisions have been less about expanding the walk zones and about getting rid of the walk zones. And so we've had families that there's a couple different scenarios where it would have made sense in a boundary decision to move a certain school in a certain direction, but where the school is located, they could actually walk to the one school. Like if we start doing things where we're moving people south or we're moving people east, there's a school that they could easily walk to. But in a boundary decision, it would have been a lot simpler, or it would have made the puzzle fit together if we would have moved them to a different one. And the board of the district has made a decision to not eliminate that, to not remove that walking option because of that. And so, yeah.
I would like to offer a slight reframe on the language. Having been a part of transportation services for so long, is that the school district really dictates the transportation zone. Where are you transporting kids from? And outside of that zone, you're not saying how kids get to school. That's a family decision. So I think you talk about your transportation zone as greater than 1 mile. Everyone within that then makes a family decision as how they're going to get to school. That could be a walk, could be a bike, could be carpooling. You're not saying as a district what that is. So I just reframe the language a little bit, that we define the transportation zone, which is what's in statute.
The 45 minutes parameter, is that something came from stakeholders? Like, how did we get to that 45 minutes? Or is it like historical data?
I think it's what it is now. Is that correct? Or close to it?
I'm not sure if we have a specific timeline. Maybe Scott knows what we've established.
I think Director John Deutsch had mentioned that would be the longest that we'd have currently, if I recall.
And if I can add to that, fits into, I think there's been some conversation around not wanting students to have to get on a bus before 7 a.m. when we start our early start times. And so if school starts at 7:45, the goal would be, if you don't have anything more than 45 minutes, then no one would get on a bus before 7 a.m.
In that not how column, would we prioritize, or typically in your experience, we address all not how, or do we get to, so obviously the laws, policies is non-negotiable, right? So each of these are really non-negotiable, or would we get into a situation where we have to now prioritize? Do we want more diverse population, or do we want more than 45 minutes ride, as an example?
Yeah, so if you adopt it, the only option, if you adopt as is and there's no changes, the only options you will get will go from current reality to desired outcomes as best as possible. And all 4 of those not hows will be addressed. We don't pick and choose. It.
Okay, thank you.
I do want to, and I know that Chase mentioned this earlier, that this doesn't have to be a one and done for the board. I mean, we're asking you to give your best thinking right now, but until you start to see options and things emerge, you may have differing thoughts as we work through the process. So I don't want you to feel like you're boxed in when you make a decision on, I think it's the 8th of July.
I think on that note, a question I was going to ask her to get some input from you too is prior to July 8th, because some of us may leave this meeting and then at 10:30 tonight we might think, oh, I wish I would have said this or shared this. And that's probably inevitable between now and July 8th. So how would you like for the board or us to take that into account for taking additional input outside of this meeting prior to July 8th, and then maybe even at the July 8th meeting? Will there be any additional input allowed at that time, or are you thinking that whatever is in the board materials at that time is really what the board should take action on, with the knowledge of down the road if there's other inputs that they want considered that can happen? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the best course is if they channel any additional information to you, to your office. Ultimately, this will be the board's document, so you'll have a chance to review that and make edits and changes before you act. We want to get it as close as possible, but like you were saying, some of us do our best thinking when we drive away from the meeting. So if there is something that comes up that you really think is important, I would channel it to the superintendent's office. And then I would assume that you would communicate that back out, a week or so prior to the meeting, so everyone has a chance to see. If you're comfortable with that as a board.
Yep. Just one last question, and I hope I didn't miss it. So the inputs are not just taken from, let's say, administration board, but I think you mentioned we have online forums, right, where public can actually give their inputs. So has that forum or that online avenue is still open, or will that be open till July 8th, or how that will work? Or is it already baked into it?
Yeah, Amy Parnell and I met today and started mapping out some of that, what that will look like. But the idea is that we'll create a space for, if you're not on the input team, you'll have a space to provide that same feedback via an online forum. So what are the strengths, concerns, ideas for improvements? And all of that will be themed and collected and shared back with the design team.
Oh.
So the input team is picked to represent the district, but it doesn't inhibit the other part of the community. We really want to hear from everyone. So
Right.
the design team, I get asked this question, does the design team pay more attention to who's on the input team versus the public? And it's no. We're looking at all the feedback, but we want to make sure we had a structured process for the feedback. And sometimes what's really hard with the public is that if it doesn't impact me, I may not have input until the next option does impact me, and now I have input. And so that's the input team is our constant through the process so that we make sure we're capturing all of that.
Okay. And yeah, no, that helps. And is it open or we haven't opened it for public?
We haven't. No. So when we start in August with the design team, they'll start generating. We generate the first set of options. They respond and go through a couple of iterations with that. So before it goes to the input team, at least a week prior, that packet will be put on the website, shared with the board. People have a chance to review it. That's when we'll open up the feedback.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And we'll take it for a window, close it, theme it, and then bring it back to the design team. And we'll do the same thing. We'll do this 2 times for sure.
Can I ask one quickly? So these bullet points, these were generated by Dr. Anderson's SLT and you right now? Or was there any other group that had input on these?
We started with a small group, a subset of the SLT for some brainstorming. We brought the draft to the SLT a week ago, and this is that work to date.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Sheila. Dan.
I want to get back for a moment to, not knowingly violating, state law policies or agreements. This is also a question to Dr. Anderson, if we do have anything on the books. I remember talking during the campaign to a gentleman about, the transportation routes and whatnot, and how there was a strong belief that we don't want to put our buses or perhaps our families in the position of, let's say, driving on, higher traffic roads like Highway 55, 494, 394. And so, based on the school, it would probably vary, building to building, but just kind of ask, how you set those, terms into effect.
Yeah, that's why we put the transportation people on the design team, so that they're aware of that. There's what's existing. If there's any conversation of future desires, they're aware of that. And they usually know the district really, really well.
Paris asked a question earlier about prioritizing the not house, and you said that they're all the same priority, which makes me wonder about the last bullet point that we added, because I do feel like that there might be, if that we would have to prioritize bus ride over that, and that the discrepancy in academics, either we have to add a word onto that bullet point that says not intentionally, or it needs to go into the what column. And I don't know, it just seems like you couldn't prioritize that as much as the other ones.
Well, the challenge for me in that one, and I mentioned that, is that we're not pulling academics in, at least into our modeling. So we would have to create another data source to be able to look at this and run data. So that's why I was pausing a little bit when you raised that. So you raised a good point. I don't have a great answer.
Yeah, and
did I hear, Sheila, you mentioning that add the word intentionally? Is that what you?
Yeah, or move it, or, I think it's a good goal to have, and that we don't discrepancy. I just don't know how, like you said, if we don't have the data, how we would even know if we were doing that.
We'd have the ability to bring a level of student achievement data into the modeling system.
Mm-hmm.
As the educator in me is that MCAs, and that now I'm focusing on student achievement as a one test score, how can we represent academics on a robust enough level that is reflective of a student's achievement, not just one test one day,
Yeah.
as an example. So it would take another huge data set, is my thinking in my mind.
I don't know, how do board colleagues feel about that bullet point if they're?
Yeah, so when I was asking that question, I kind of had two thoughts in mind. One, realistically, to look at how much and how big of a change is it? I mean, if it is not significant boundary change, then my going in assumption is things won't change materially. So that, at least, that was kind of my thought process. And second was, I was thinking more along the build teams. That's where we'll get the data point. So as we do, let's say, big boundary realignment, I would imagine we would get more data points, because now, again, whether it is diverse population or otherwise, we would rely on build team and their data points to say, hey, something has changed significantly now because of boundaries.
If I might offer, I think the challenge with this one that we might get into is that in a rapid growing district, and what gets built in certain areas can change the complexity and the complexion of academic performance in a building very quickly, and we've seen that happen. So I think by focusing on some of those other areas like demographics and your walk-in zones, you will be controlling for some of that. But again, I don't know, we would never knowingly do that, but we don't control where kids live and where families live. And so it'd be very hard on this one. Director Pryor, I think you make a very good point. It'd be very hard to control on this one, and where people build or where apartment complexes are built or where the district continues to evolve can greatly impact what a school makeup looks like.
I like that the word intentionally is in there now. I would also be okay with removing that. That's my thought on it.
I mean, I will say, I think it is, a very good idea. I mean, we do hear that a lot, people saying things like, performance in this building is, different than performance in this building. Why is that? And I think the point that, we like to make a lot is, it's the same instruction, same curriculum, all that. And so really, I mean, from a messaging perspective, I think that's where maybe our communications, comes into effect. If we can't redistrict or reallocate persons across the district, perhaps we can still emphasize, our students are receiving an excellent education, and what discrepancies there may be in performance, we are trying to, fix.
Well, in this is saying that your boundary process will not knowingly or intentionally create greater discrepancies. It's not addressing how do you solve those discrepancies now. We're not going to get into any programming in the boundary process.
I'm finding myself wondering a little bit if, from that design perspective, like you mentioned, Ray, if in order to accomplish that or avoid that, if you would need to build in some assumptions about a school that a student would attend or a particular place that a student would live, and if the design process would make it very difficult without building in some assumptions which may not be true. And that might be a difficult parameter to navigate around with decision making, but perhaps it's don't build in discrepancies for academic opportunities, or maybe there's a different way to think about that. I think I need to do a little more thinking about this one personally. I'm not sure what the right wording is about what it is exactly that is unacceptable or that we're trying to avoid or navigate around that may not have relevance to actual design.
And it may be that we don't want to create an option that diminishes academic opportunities or creates discrepancies in academic opportunities. And then the rest of the how is really the work of the district in the future.
And I think along with that too, maybe I'll just add into that we've had a lot of conversations recently just about being responsive to the unique needs of individual schools, and then living up to our mission and our vision of being responsive to the unique needs of our students. So a lot of that kind of gets into, maybe more than design of an attendance area, design of instructional responsiveness and resource allocation. And those are all things that we've been having some conversations about too.
It seems absolutely acceptable for the superintendent's office in teaching and learning to have conversations and think about. I think we all understand the intent of it, and that conversation. And so I think putting in some guardrails around that, it makes sense, but you want to do something that's actionable. So I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Can I add? I have a question. I mean, this sound, I listened carefully, this sound quite, good intention, but I think it is very hard to do. And then students are changing. They're moving also on top. And then, for example, I'll give my example. My youngest one finally got friends in our cul-de-sac because we used to have no kids at all. So I don't want him to be separated from his friends because they are like buddies right now. We're so happy because my other kids did not receive that one. It's like cutting friendship too, if it to that degree. If I'm hearing correct me if I understood correct. Some schools are getting different outcomes. Am I right? What I'm hearing doesn't make sense. For example, if different academic results, okay? Does it make sense? I'll give my example. When I moved from one school to another school, I realized where I thrived. 1 year in our classroom, we had after school care, almost like for about 2 hours. And we had teachers, retired teachers coming and reading fairy tales to us, which I loved. And then on top of it, they allowed us we were doing homework right there. So if I had questions, since my grandmother couldn't help me that much, I was doing it there and coming to her. And that year helped me tremendously to gain knowledge in math, in some how to do things. So next year, even though we didn't have that kind of after-school care anymore, I was already on my own. I knew how to do. Maybe then instead of doing that way route, school can find out the way how you can create some sort of after-school care for kids who are in need of like reading instruction or math. And if they are not going to be far away, then families would be more willing. Which family would not agree that their kids would get more help in academics, for example? I would say that more likely that families would agree to have with maybe 1 hour of after-school care, but helping in academics. Would it work?
And I think what you just described is we don't want to create an option that limits academic opportunities or reduces them. Because what you just described are more opportunities. So we don't want to. We want to be able to have the opportunity to do that to help support kids.
Yeah.
We'll chew on this and we'll do our best thinking on the drive home, and then we'll bring you back a final copy. If you have other additions, please channel that to the superintendent's office, and then we'll communicate that back. July 8th, then you'll be asked to adopt the guiding change document and then officially the process, and then that empowers the design team and input team to start work. And I think we've already received the student data, so we've started our process on the back end. We're looking at capacities coming in, then we'll be able to complete our report. You'll have access to that first report too, so you'll see the 5 and 10 year projections as it sits today with no changes, and then you'll be able to compare and contrast that as we do our process. It'll be more data than you probably want, but. Any other questions or comments for me?
Just one comment from me, if I can, is I think in general, what I'm sensing, and I always try to read the room the best I can, and this isn't an action item, it's a discussion item, but I'm just kind of sensing that in general, I think there's a feel with the board that this is heading in the right direction, and it'll continue to grow and evolve a little bit and change. But I'm kind of sensing from my perspective, speaking on behalf of the board, I guess to some degree, is stay the course and continue moving forward. And there's been opportunity for inputs on the bullet points that we've included on these 3 categories. And I think there's general feel of it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Anderson. I think it was good to hear that we just don't have to go from today to July 8th. There is an opportunity in between to talk to him and suggest anything else, because doing it on the spot today, you might have forgotten something, like you said, and want to make sure that we have the opportunity to come back and suggest maybe something else.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Okay, moving on. I don't believe there are any human services reports. Next one on the agenda is finance reports from finance and operations report from Executive Director Scott Lesage. He will present a budget preparation overview.
Maybe while they're getting set up, I'll just make a couple of preliminary comments. I just want to thank Scott and David, who's here, and the other team members from the finance department for their diligent efforts in putting together what they're going to be presenting to you tonight. You've had some work session presentations in the past, and I know that the finance department's worked very closely with the human resources department as well, and all other departments, but I think those two have really worked closely to get a good grasp of our own current reality, kind of what the objectives are for not only the short term, i.e. the approval of the 24-25 budget, but also positioning for the longer term. As we all know, school funding and financing has a lot of uncertainties as we move forward, and any given school year can have an impact, which we learned several years ago when the pandemic settled in. So we just need to position well for putting the best possible guide together for the budget for the coming year, and also using that to position us well for the long term. So with that, I'll turn it over to our finance team here tonight. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Superintendent Anderson. That was a good summary. I think mine will take a little bit longer, so I'll try to get through it pretty well. But I also wanted to thank Superintendent Anderson and the other executive directors and their teams, because it really is a team effort. And then the gentleman sitting to the left here has really proven just what a huge asset he is to the district and to our team. And so very grateful to have him and all the hours he puts in. And he's one of those guys that when he's kind of the Jake from State Farm for me, because I'll be at home and it'll be 10:30. My wife's like, "Who's texting you?" It's just David from Wayzata. So anyways, Chair Sahoni and board members, thank you for allowing us to be here tonight to talk about the 24-25 preliminary budgets. Tonight, as you saw in the presentation that was in the board packet, we'll be going through the general fund. We'll also be going through the construction fund and the debt service fund. Next slide. Oops, do I get to control maybe? Nice, all right. Okay, perfect. So we'll start just kind of agenda overview. We're going to start with a background with some of the assumptions and components that go into the creation of the budgets. Obviously, there's a lot of them, and as you saw in the presentation, there is a lot of variables that can have some massive impacts on our budget. I always say when people ask me for a set number, where are we going to end up, or where will we end up percent-wise, it's kind of goes back to economics. It's if then, or, on the other hand, there's a lot of different variables that can play into this, and things can abruptly change that can impact us. So as Superintendent Anderson was saying, when we went into cost containment, that was the general idea, is to kind of right size the district, if you will, and get us back onto the playing field, but also learning from what we experienced. So just kind of pointing that out, and then we will cover those budgets that I mentioned, and then we'll do questions at the conclusion. You're going to notice on several of our slides here, they're going to be similar to what you've seen in the past. That's obviously intentional and something I've kind of pointed out in a lot of different things. But as I mentioned tonight, we're going to be covering the general fund. That's the one that everybody kind of pays attention to, whether good or bad, because that's where the unassigned funds are, and that's where you're seeing kind of the health of the district overall. As you recall, food service and community ed came at our last board session on June 10th, and the board approved both of those. You will see those at the end of the presentation as well, just so it gives a good macro level overview of the district and the overall budget amounts that the district has. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be going over the building construction fund and the debt service fund. We've seen this slide before. I know my predecessor, Dee Dee Caring, had it in some of her presentations. We won't go into big detail about it. I know the board members know about these too, but just kind of essentially a breakdown of where these sit. Some are dictated by statute in the UFARs, and some are, as mentioned, they're assigned, non-spendable, so prepaid items if it's materials that we're going to use over several years. Inventories could be fuel, things of those nature. And then committed funds, the district doesn't have any of those at this time. And then the unassigned, which is the one we pay close attention to, because that's the one that we're watching for statutory operating debt. Similar slide again. This is just showing you saw this on the 10th as well, but it's this part of the process. I think David made a joke the other day that his wife had said, geez, all you talk about is budget and audit. And as you can see there, it's budget most of the year, and then what's not on there is audit, but you saw that on a past screen. So it's just kind of a cyclical thing, and that's on purpose because Wayzata is unique in a lot of ways from other districts and similar in some, but we are constantly monitoring our situation. We're constantly watching it, especially coming out of the pandemic, but so many variables can change, whether it's enrollment, whether it's cost increases, whether it's settlements with negotiations. There's so many moving parts that it's something our team is constantly watching. The formula allowance, I know this is something that's, I never want to not put on there because this is a huge, huge driver of how things sit with us. This is, of course, besides enrollment, this is a huge, huge player for us. So this is roughly about 60% of the dollars we get. As you recall, with the last legislative session in 2023 in May, they gave us 4 and 2. And then after that, it was a floor of 2 and a ceiling of 3. So as you can see last year after the 4%, we're now going back down to the 2%. The reason I think this is so important to point out, as you'll see further into the presentation, is that very little, if any, of our expenditures are coming in at that 2%. That would be very wishful thinking. It's just not reality. So I think it just highlights, what the school is, what the district is tasked with to provide everything that we do to the community and to the students and to our staff with the money that we get. I would also argue that Wayzata is very lucky because we have an extremely supportive community. Our portion of levy funds is a lot higher than most districts. So we are very grateful for that because that does help us some. But you can see without enrollment growth and without this ever catching up, it is a challenge for school districts, and we are not immune to that, and we found that out during the pandemic. So I think this slide is important to point out. The slide on the right is one that everyone has seen. I think I've had that in a few budget presentations. I know my predecessor did too, and it's some nice work that Ehlers has done for districts all over the state. But it just highlights from 2003 to 2025 if the formula allowance would have kept up with inflation. And you can see the gap from the 7281 up to that 8637. Just kind of highlights that big spread. So we just took it a step further and did really simple math on the left side there. But this, I'll just kind of walk you through it quick because it is pretty astounding and it's important to show. If you look at that number, just like I pointed out, the 8,600 versus the 7,281 that we're getting, that's a $1,356 difference per student. So per student. If you look at our estimated enrollment, what we are budgeting this off of, that's 12,684 for next year. So if you take that times the allowance that we're getting this year, that's about $92 million. Now, if you take that same 12,684 and you multiply it by what we would have received if the formula allowance had kept up with inflation, you see a considerably higher number. So as you can see on the bottom there, that's just under 17.2 million. And I would point out that's just 1 year. So as I mentioned, this is just really simple math, as you can see, but this doesn't take into account all the years from 2003 to now. So again, we can't solve it, but I think it's important to know all the information as well. Because just because we're a school district, we don't live kind of in an imaginary world where we can control our expenditures and that people are fine just getting what they're given. So I think that's really important kind of to keep in mind, the bigger picture. All right. I included this slide just because we are in a growing district and we're grateful for that, but there seems to be kind of some misconceptions when you do see a lot of growth, when you see new houses coming. People say, geez, that's more money for the district. You know, they're getting more money. That's, as a general rule, that's not necessarily true. There are some factors that are just purely driven that would be that, but as a general rule, and the high percentage of them, it's only as new properties are added, the tax impact per property decreases. So I know that can, and I'm not going to get into all the details because we'll actually be doing a presentation on that coming up. But as a general rule, it's a little bit more challenging now because you have properties that are seeing increases in their valuation each year. So of course that will increase, but as more come on, that's offsetting that. So it's not additional revenue that the district gets. That is mainly driven off of the pupil revenue system as well. So more pupils, more revenue, less, same difference. So just want to point that out. We are very different than cities and counties in how they set that. All right, so whenever you're putting a budget together, we're going off of key assumptions. I think that's really important to highlight because we cannot see into the future. We can only go off the best available information we have at this time. So we really rely on that data, but we also point it out so that the board and the public are aware of some of the components and assumptions that are going into the budget. So just running through a few of them on our revenue projection, we are, as I've mentioned a few times, we're using 12,684 students. That's up from the 12,408 that we used on the revised budget that we brought to the board for approval, and that's up 276 students. So that's a pretty substantial increase. In one of the future slides, you'll see kind of the breakdown that we've been experiencing pre-pandemic and what we're seeing right now. The formula allowance, as I mentioned, this is 60% of our revenue, and it's back down to 2% from the 4% in 2024, and you can see the difference there. Levy dollars, it's roughly a 3% increase. There's some adjustments that Director Draskovich will mention a little bit when we get to that slide, but we did have some adjustments on there that kind of plays with that percentage, but generally it's about a 3% increase. And then the special education cross subsidy and the federal to pay tuition bills, that's something we also factored in on here because obviously that cross subsidy did make a huge difference for us, and we're very grateful for that. That came out of the legislative session. As you are all well aware too, we're also seeing increased needs, which also bring increased costs with them. We did make a strategic shift as the district because we were eligible at this time to utilize some of our federal dollars that already existed, they're not COVID related, to pay tuition bills. And then we shift those expenditures over from federal to state that will generate some additional revenue. I'm always scared to say additional revenue when we talk about the cross subsidy because we're still not made whole at all. It's just bringing in additional revenue to kind of close that gap. And then the federal allocations and COVID dollars, we're forecasting non-COVID dollars to be very similar to the current year, and then we'll see those final COVID dollars come to an end at the end of September here. This is just kind of a highlight. I won't read through the whole thing, but it's just kind of a visual of what we've already discussed on prior slides, but it just kind of highlights it. This is a big assumption. We always talk about enrollment and how crucial it is when we're looking at everything. But as I mentioned, because enrollment in Minnesota is the key driver on our revenues, that's something that we're always paying really close attention to, especially in a district likewise out of that has growing enrollment. So as you can see here, again, I won't hit too much on it, but with that increase of 276 students, just doing very simple math, this doesn't account for the adjusted pupil units, which is the grades 7 through 12 are adjusted at 1.2. This is just a simple visualization to show based on that 7281 times those students, that would bring in an additional $2 million. If you factor in, I'm not using exact numbers, but very close, when you factor in that gen ed revenue along with the levy, it's closer to 10,000 a student. So you're looking right there. That's almost $2.8 million that those new students bring in. So we always talk about how crucial those is and how crucial that enrollment growth continues to be, because I think we've seen from some of our immediate neighbors that are experiencing some difficulties now. They've pointed it out as well, like where districts are shielded from those cost cuts and being able to offer and expand programming, it's through expanded growth. It's through adding students, because those additional dollars are able to help cover that gap that we don't get. So I just really want to point that out and really highlight that, because our budget is really hinging on that student enrollment growth. And you're going to see a number towards the end of this presentation, one of the last slides for the general fund, that's going to look very similar to that number that you're seeing of the 2.7. So I just will highlight how crucial it is, that enrollment growth, and what a big impact that has on a budget. You've seen these slides before, but this is just a breakdown of, as a general rule, where our revenues come from. They can vary slightly, percent up or down, depending on the year, but typically they stay right in this area. Again, these are just what we highlighted. Federal, we're not seeing any impact. State aid back to 2%, and then just the asterisk on the levy. Not Dr. Dreskovich, Director Dreskovich will talk about this shortly. So, all right, sorry. And then expenditure projection information, salaries and benefits. We never put what these percentages are, but I can tell you we have several costing models going on. Our finance department has developed some pretty intricate costing models that's down to the individual human being that works for the district. And we're also able to compare those against the district's costing models for negotiations. So we kind of have a check and balance system down to the individual employee. And we put in, we already know what they are on the contracts that are settled. And then obviously this year is a big year with a lot of contracts that we're working on negotiations with, that Executive Director Stacy Voss is working on, but we built all of our budgets based on the parameters set by the board. We did factor in the 7% increase in health insurance costs. Transportation, we increased roughly 6% based on the recent information that we received from our transportation providers. Utilities, I know we've talked about this before at the last session, but this is something that David and his team and Jack Stearns looked at 10 years worth of history. Obviously that can vary because we can't control snow, we can't control cold, heat. Even with the rains, I think I made the joke to Dr. Anderson with all of the rain last week that at least we don't have to plow it. So it's a lot cheaper to get it now than in the winter. So special education, we're budgeting roughly a 10% increase due to the increased needs that we've talked about earlier in this presentation and then at past sessions. That also factors in the $1.5 million cost shift. And then technology, we just add that because increased expenditures are offset by the increased revenues from our levy. All right, this is similar to the revenues, but this just kind of highlights we are a service industry. That's what we provide. So as you can see here, 52% is salaries, 19% is employee benefits, which can vary slightly, but purchase services, a big part of those are also related to providing services directly to students. So as you can see here, a giant percentage of every dollar we spend is in some way on a staff member. So recap of the budget assumptions. So the expenditures, so it's per contract or board parameters for the salaries. Health insurance, we said there was a 7% increase. I just put some information next to TRA. This is an increase of 0.2% from last year. It's not going up by 8.7 or 8.75%. But this is one that is varying. It has increased and continues to increase, and much higher on the employer side, which that's a big cost for an employer, and it's kind of something that's never really talked about, but it is adds a big cost to a district. So something that we're paying attention to and is factored into our models, both for negotiations and for our employment models that we use for the budgeting. Supplies and materials, we roughly increased those 3%, and then as I mentioned with fuel utilities, 5%, and transportation at 6%. Everybody always we kind of want to forget about the pandemic. We don't want to think about it, but I don't think we can do that at Wayzata for several huge reasons, because I would argue, in addition to items that we just covered, just the kind of underfunding, if you will, of schools from the Gen Ed formula, the massive crucialness that I pointed out that we rely on that enrollment growth, and we have in the past, which has allowed us to offer the programming, kind of plug the holes of the funding, lack of funding that we get. The pandemic, I don't, and I've said it several times, I don't think Wayzata could have been better positioned in a bad way to be massively impacted by the pandemic. The district was going off all the best information we had at the time, what we'd experienced for a lot of years, and we saw it all kind of come to a halt very quickly. I'll point out some of those items on here. And then I also include with that, because the reason for the cost containment was the pandemic. So I think they go together, and this kind of tells a story. I know the slides have a lot of information on them. I did try to break them up into a few different slides and made the font bigger, but I hated to remove anything because I think they're all very crucial things to mention about why we are in the situation we are and how hard the district, the staff, and the community have worked and supported along with the board to get us out of this situation. So I won't read all the words, but just a reminder from the previous slides, this is in addition to, just kind of the underfunding on the general education formula. As I noted there, that $17.2 million that you saw on a prior slide, imagine the difference that would make. That would have made a huge difference for us. The continued impact to Wayzata Public Schools, as I pointed out, you can't take a paintbrush and say every district was impacted by the pandemic the same. Wayzata, as I mentioned, because of our unique characteristics, because we are a growing district, because we do live in an affluent community, those really targeted against us. And what I mean by that is, as you all know, we did not only not get the 250 students that you saw the impact of what that means financially for us on a previous slide, we lost 200 kids. Obviously, that makes a massive, massive impact. So, and then being in more of an affluent community, that meant we got a lot less of the COVID-related dollars. So you'll see it on a future slide, roughly about $11.8 million. That's on over $750 million worth of budgets over that time. So really pretty minuscule. As the district and the board have worked very hard to get out of the cost containment, as we still work through that, it actually turned out to be a good thing for us because we're seeing districts around the state now having to shed a lot of jobs because those COVID dollars went away. So it was kind of a double-edged sword, if you will. And you'll see on another slide too, but if the pandemic hadn't happened, we would be sitting, it could be estimated that we'd be over 13,000 students right now. So, and you have to look at that on a compounding annual basis, which you'll see in a future slide. One of the big other things that really impacted us during the pandemic was we are very loyal to our staff and our students in our community. And when the pandemic happened, we stayed loyal to our staff and students and our community. As you recall, there was a ton of unknowns. Again, I don't think this could have happened at a worse time, the timing of the pandemic too, because that's our hiring season. No one really truly knew what the impacts were going to be. But we stayed loyal to our staff because that aligned with the district's strategic roadmap. It was the right thing to do. We knew that we needed to have our staff in place to support our students and our families during the tough time. And as I pointed out, the exceptional staff that we have, we knew we needed them. And we didn't know the impact. First, it was a 2-week shutdown, then it was a month. Then we were all sitting, and I wasn't at Wayzata at the time, but at my past district, I remember sitting in July. We're all hoping for a big update. And they said, you might have to offer 2 different methods of working with the students, and that was a hybrid and in person, which we said, wait, then you're going to need more staff. So I think there was just a lot of confusion. The district did what we believed was the right thing here and held on to those, held on to our teachers. Obviously, that came at a massive, massive cost. As I pointed out in the past slide, we not only didn't get the 250 kids, we lost 200. So you take away all that additional crucial revenue that we had, and you hold on to your staff, that's a pretty tremendous impact to the bottom line. Luckily at the time, I think we were sitting on roughly an 11% fund balance, which helped us kind of weather that storm in the short term. But obviously my predecessor and the board and the other district leadership was very wise to go into cost containment and address it right away, as unpopular as it was. One other thing that I thought was very interesting, in hindsight, if we kind of would have not listened to advice that we were getting, and we would have laid off staff, the federal government actually came in, and I was at a different district that it happened. They kept telling us, do not pay your unemployment costs. Don't pay them. The federal government's going to come in and credit those. I think we received about 50% credit on the dollars that we had. At my past district at Wayzata, we were never made whole for holding on to those staff. So just kind of an interesting thing to point out. The legislative changes, obviously the new funding with the 4%, that was crucial. The special education cross-subsidy aid was crucial, but not all areas were considered and addressed. And what I mean by that is it was kind of that paintbrush macro approach. They didn't really look or listen to individual districts. It was kind of what we saw on the Star Tribune on Sunday. They mentioned wealthy districts like Minnetonka, Wayzata, and Edina. People just kind of didn't really think about us. They thought, oh, you're fine. You're always expanding, not understanding the true intricacies and how the funding comes together for districts. As I pointed out, those districts I just mentioned, won't go into detail about the other 2, but with Wayzata, our growing enrollment is what has always shielded us. So when you really understand school finance, you understand the true impacts that it had for our district with the pandemic. So, and then the unfunded mandates, that's something we're watching. The summer unemployment, the true impacts are still very unknown. I know they sat with a big pot of money last year, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's not going to be bad. I think we're already hearing that there's a lot more claims already this year. And that's kind of what we predicted when we brought this to the board in the past. Because it was such a new thing last spring, not a lot of people knew about it. So that's something we're watching. We don't have any new or updated information on it, but it is something that we're paying attention to. So those unfunded mandates make it really difficult. And then as I mentioned earlier, the increased special education needs are still impacting the general fund. So as grateful as we are for those additional cross-subsidy dollars, when your costs are rising, it's still a bigger hit, right? So over time, if your number continues to grow into the $25, $26, $27 million range, and it was at a 22 when this came into play, you're still having the same impact on the general fund until that can get under control. And then moving forward, returning to financial fitness and long-term sustainability for the district. So we have to plan with the long-term in mind with our revenues. And that's because we're back to the 2% with the max of 3. There's also the unexpected, if the growth slows or doesn't come to what we're projecting, the board and the community can see what impact that does have on our budget. I think those are just really big things to keep in mind. And then just remembering when we did do cost containment, it was to get the district kind of right-sized, if you will, from the huge, enormous impact that the pandemic had on the district financially. So enrollment growth considerations, this is just kind of reiteration of what I've said before, but we are back to experiencing student growth that's similar to pre-pandemic levels. Enrollment growth along with the cost containment efforts have allowed the district to continue to move forward in getting back to a sustainable financial position to deal with the underfunding. I will kind of preach it forever because it's the viciousness of school finance in Minnesota. When you're a growing district, it's great. When you're staying the same, it's not very good. And when you're declining, it's terrible because we are a pupil-driven revenue system. We've been on the good side of that for the majority of time. pandemic obviously impacted us big time. So, and we see what kind of impacts that can have. So student growth, as I pointed out, it's basically a funding gap, if you will, for districts to be able to continue to operate and expand and offer new things. And then we just can't continue to depend on growing enrollment because at some point it will slow and stop as the district grows out. So I think that's something that Director Draskovich and I, it probably keeps us awake at night. We're very excited to be doing the enrollment study that Ray was just talking about, because that is a big thing that the board and the community and the staff have to recognize that at some point we will grow out. And districts closer to Minneapolis have experienced that as the years have happened. And so I think we just need to keep that in mind. The pandemic was a terrible thing, but there's some lessons we can learn from it, and just how that enrollment plays such a big role. This is just a slide that just highlights, it's just a graphical representation of the enrollment. I went back to FY15 and then forward, but you can see pre-pandemic, there was some years we were growing north of 400, some 378, 245, and then you see what happened there. And those numbers really don't tell the story because of the compounding impact in those years that you didn't have the growth. Those are all revenues that are lost. This slide is probably one of my favorite slides. It's very simplified math again, but I would welcome anyone to argue with me on this one. This is just a representation of the dollars, because we get a lot of questions. I've had the comments made to me of, what did Wayzata do with the dollars? What was the finance department doing? Where did they spend all this? My simple answer to that would be the pandemic impacted us greatly. And uniquely. I know there's some other districts in the state that were similar to us, and we probably know who they are, that are struggling too. But I would say the reason we didn't spend it well is because we didn't have it. So if you just look at this, there's two different scenarios, but even if you took where our enrollment was in FY20 at the 12,000, and you just laid in those 250 kids on average that we were experiencing growth, and multiply that by the aid and levy, you're talking about $11.4 million at a minimum that the district would have. Now, if you look at scenario 2 and you start at the same base with the 3.9 million, but now you take where we would have been, so you take that 636 kids and multiply it by the 10,000, you can see that's north of $22 million. So as we've talked about cost containment, as we've talked about our unique situation at Wayzata, this just highlights those dollars didn't come in. So as grateful as we were for the legislative package that we received, the underlying issue and the underlying cause of why Wayzata went into the situation they did is kind of right in front of you. It was the enrollment loss. It was the impacts, and a lot of that was absolutely outside of the district and the board's control. This is just another graph. As I pointed out before, I had a mentor early on in my career that said, stop just putting up numbers, put up graphs. So this is just a graph to show the difference of where our current enrollment is and where it would be if the pandemic hadn't happened. This slide is just data directly from the district website. There's a link on there as well, but it just shows the cost containment that the district took on once it recognized the massive and enormous impact the pandemic had on it. So again, I wasn't here at the time, so I can't take credit for any of that, but the board and the district leadership obviously was very wise. I give a lot of credit to my predecessor, Dee Dee Caring, because I know it was extremely unpopular. I can tell you, coming in as the new director of finance into my dream job, I was like, what are we doing? And so I think that took a lot of courage. And as we're seeing from this presentation tonight, it was an absolute necessity. And it's a necessity that we follow through on it, because I think it's really easy to see, things are looking up. We're looking like we're coming out of it. I think following through is crucial, because those dollars, if they aren't cut, they go directly to that expenditure. And then as we have seen, those costs grow at a much higher expense. So just something to keep in mind. The long-term picture was to put the district in a good financial position that we were able to deal with any future things that will come about. And as we know, we will grow it at some point. All right, David, you're up.
My one slide. So So the district has a long-term facility maintenance. It's also short for LTFM. We do a 10-year long-term facility maintenance plan that comes to the district board members usually around June to July. And it goes through approval process. That allows us to go on to the levy and levy for long-term facility maintenance dollars that we use to replace like-for-like things within the district as we go through re-maintenance pairs and upgrades. So the district usually spends on the annual $7.5 to $16.5 million through every fiscal year. So as of now, I'm going to kind of skip down to the bottom. We have a $5.4 million adjustment coming in 24-25, and this is due to the 21-22 school year. With the levy, there's a 2-year lag on your adjustments, so we'll be really realizing this adjustment now in 24-25. And this $5.4 million is really due to the COVID happening at this time frame. I found a little snippet from the whitehouse.gov that I thought I wanted to add in here. It says, at the same time, COVID-related shutdown rapidly rotated consumer demand towards goods and away from in-person services. The collision with the pandemic-induced supply shocks and strong demand for goods generating inflation pressures across the global economy. Suppliers were unable to elevate demand, and the true cost of high, efficient, and fragile global supply chain became clear. So when 21-22 happened in COVID, we were hoping to continue our long-term facility maintenance within the district, but with that, we had a hard issue with gathering the supplies to do that. So with this, we weren't able to spend our full plan, so now we will realize that $5.4 million adjustment in 24-25, but it will have no effect on the bottom end of the district because like long-term facility maintenance, it has a restricted fund balance, and right now we have a restricted fund balance as of June 30th of $12.1 million, so it will come out of that, and it will have no relying reflect on the unassigned fund balance.
Perfect. Thank you, David. And as David mentioned, it's kind of hard to conceptualize because the budget that you're going to be approving factors in this negative $5.4 million, but it has no impact on the bottom line. It's literally a cash flow issue. The district intended to spend those dollars. We weren't able to for obvious reasons that David just mentioned. So, and I will say, David just said his one slide. The presentation is not possible without the hard work that he did and his team did. So I wouldn't have been able to build a presentation with him without his hard work. So
I don't
David,
know. I don't know how I can sit to next to someone with so much humor. So I have to interject my own, which I don't have a lot of.
Yeah, you definitely aren't as funny as me. So I'm just kidding. You're awesome. All right, I'm kidding. I'll get back to it. So you're going to see kind of the reason I just mentioned it, but the reason that we brought that up is because it explains one of the budgetary slides. So we'll quickly hit on federal funding because that's always kind of a targeted conversation. Obviously, it's something that's in the news. You hear schools, sitting on billions of dollars and millions of dollars across the country. And I just like to, we'd like to bring that to the board and to the community as well, just so you know where we're sitting with those funds. So you've seen Jen Welk, who works with our federal programs and special ed programs. She oversees those dollars kind of with me and our team in the district. But she works very closely with the people mentioned up on here. Some of them are in attendance tonight, but this is a very important area as well. And it's kind of what we've talked about with the other funds that have come to the board. We're really trying to work in a collaborative nature. Just because they are the ones that are running their programs and know it really well. So as I mentioned earlier, the COVID relief funding. So the total funds that we've received since inception are about $11.8 million. We've spent about 11.16 year to date. And then we have additional expenses that we're planning on spending by the end of this fiscal year. So that's just in a few days here, but it was estimated at this time there's about 157,000, which leaves us with about 512,000. And these are dollars that we already have planned, and that Executive Director Dana Miller and her team have been working with our team on how those dollars will be used to make sure that we're not leaving a dollar on the table as of 9/30 as well, because it'll be dollars that we'll be able to use to benefit the district. and essentially won't have a lot of tails. So cross-subsidy reduction aid, I won't go into very much description on this. This is something the board's seen several times and something that's been talked about, and obviously it was a very hot topic legislative item. But it has been a huge help for us. It was a big increase in revenue for us in our projected budget last year and into next year. So I just think it's important to have in here. So when you kind of break it down on the right there, you can see the impact that the COVID dollars did have in our budget. And then in addition to the COVID funds kind of waning, we also shifted $1.5 million from our federal dollars over to our state aid. So you can see next year we're projecting to be about 2.7 in revenues and expenditures. And just as a reminder to the board, we have to spend the dollars before we can go in and grab them. So they have to be spent before we can grab them. So that's where it's also important in some instances to have a healthy fund balance because you are cash flowing those expenditures. All right, so getting into the preliminary budget, I won't read everything on the left side there, but because we've seen that in prior presentations, but it just kind of outlines what is included inside of the general fund budget. Obviously, that's where the main stake of our expenditures are. In previous slides, we saw what makes that up. We are very heavily staff-based because we're a service industry, so that's what makes up a ton of it. LTFM is inside of there. Anything over $2 million of LTFM would be inside of the construction fund, but how the language is written, that is very few and far between anymore with LTFM. And kind of just highlighting anything else in there, just like we've said before, things that can impact the general fund and why it's important to have our unassigned fund balance is enrollment fluctuations, which I've really hit on, property tax delinquencies or abatements, unanticipated price increases, and COVID-19 pandemic. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. And then any unforeseen public health emergencies or anything like that. Unfortunately, these were all things that not specifically that I've always listed in past districts. You never kind of thought any of them would come true. And I think we found out, holy smokes, we did experience these, and we see what a giant impact they have on a district, especially a district like Wayzata. If you kind of look over to the right, you look at that bottom line. So on this slide, this incorporates what Director Draskovic was talking about. This includes the LTFM adjustment, that negative $5.4 million. So that's why you're seeing a negative $2.863 million deficit for next year. This really doesn't do service to what the actual operating of the district is and where we assume and expect, assuming everything kind of stays on pace with what our assumptions were. But it's not a good depiction, but we want to show it because that is what you'll be approving and just laying in there that the LTFM adjustments inside of there. So now when we look at the general fund, once we take that out, that adjustment, included in here are the restricted, non-spendable, assigned, and unassigned. As a general rule, or kind of our practice has been, we're always trying to utilize those dollars. So when they do have a fin code attached to them, obviously we're trying to spend those dollars. And so they're also included in here. So as for the most part, those fin codes kind of zero each other out. And then by default, it ends up where these will impact the general fund. So inside of here, again, just a summary, we're projecting 12,684 students, up 276. And we are building in all the expenditures that we just went over, spending the COVID-related dollars. And then I just added on the bottom there, just without going into substantial detail, but we did add in all the new legislative action items and new funding streams. So a lot of those were helpful, and some were rewritten statutory language that's actually recreated problems for us because we could no longer use them for what we used them for, which then means it's coming out of the unassigned general fund. So that's kind of the challenges with there, but I just wanted to note that those are in there. READ Act, I know Executive Director Dana Miller has talked about these. They are factored in. I think, David, we've factored in about $900,000 worth of READ Act funds.
That is correct.
And I don't want to speak for Dana, but I know that they have a general plan, and she's kind of discussed that. So I'm sure she'll be coming with more information at a future session because we are all learning. Honestly, as of last Monday, Jen Welk sat on on a MASBO work session, and everybody is asking tons of questions about it. I mean, the dollars are coming and they call them FY24 dollars, but it's illegal to spend them in FY24. You have to spend them in FY25. So I think there's a lot of learning to go with this. And I know that the district will come with a future plan. This is kind of just reiteration of the past slide, but I just point out on here just some really key points. Obviously, it's really hard to land on where we think we'll for sure end up. It's going to be kind of pivotal how we end this current fiscal year. That isn't even over yet. We've started preliminary audit work, but that's on kind of the simple stuff. And then once the year ends, we kind of sit and wait for a little while, wait for bills to come in, wait for things to kind of come to fruition, and then we'll start to put the audit together. So there's a lot of unknowns at this point. When we project out, when we look at current year and into next year, it gets really difficult. And I know I've mentioned it in the presentation and in past board work sessions, but I really don't like giving an exact number or even sometimes a range, because as we're seeing from this presentation, there's so many things that can impact the district's finances, and we've seen how delicate they are. So kind of listing over to the right there, when you look at that, some of the big things that could, have a devastating impact would, if we didn't address, would be not following through with the cost containment, the student growth not coming to fruition, and obviously negotiations with our staff, the salaries and benefits. As we pointed out, that's a giant percentage of our costs that can have drastic and huge impacts. I think that was one of the hard things, and I think districts are experiencing it when our legislators had kind of touted historic funding. That's kind of all people heard, and they didn't kind of understand the backdrop of finance in schools. And so there was just this underlying assumption that there was all this money sitting around. And as we see, that's not the case. So just something to keep in mind. Obviously, a referendum failing would have a massive impact on us, a tech levy failing, expenditures continuing to outpace revenues, and then the continued challenges of the gen ed formula not keeping up with inflation that we looked at earlier. So some silver linings in this. Obviously, we're projecting revenue over expenditure. This is a positive, and this is slightly, this is up from our initial forecast, which puts us in a better place. But as I pointed out in an earlier slide, you notice that 2.7 is very similar to a number that we saw, and that is with the enrollment growth. So it just shows the board, the community, and the staff of the district just how crucial that enrollment growth is and what it does for the district. So I think we just need to be really mindful. I think I would be leery about getting too far ahead because we're trying to become more financially fit and keep the long term in place. And we still don't know for sure that those kids would show up. So I think it's something that we're monitoring. As I mentioned, it'll be something we're watching continually and we'll come back to the board with. But it's just really important to point out silver lining in it as the enrollment changes and as we see those students come in, district staff will work with the principals to kind of deploy teacher hotspots to be able to create or mitigate situations. So, all right, now we'll go to the really easy funds. So the construction fund and the debt fund, debt service. So construction fund, and David, please feel free to add anything, but essentially, this is just where our bond issues sit in. As you know, that dwindled down. The only thing that we have left, I believe, is just the abatement bonds. So if I remember correctly, that's about what we're assuming we'll have left after this year. And we have plans to try to spend those dollars down with those abatement bonds. So this isn't a real big thing, as you can see the description on the other side, but that just kind of outlines what it is. And then finally, the debt service fund. This again is depending on the general obligation debt the district has and along with other things. That's what sits in here, and that's something that's levied and we pay on each year. This is just a picture of everything I mentioned. It pulls all of our funds together that the board's looked at. Obviously, we're talking about Fund 6, Fund 7, and Fund 1 tonight, but it is pretty astounding when you look at just the pure dollar amount that we're, over $250 million with our budgets. So it's a big number, and it's something we're watching very closely all the time. And then continued monitoring and planning. So I've hit on these a few times, but variables, things that could quickly change the current projection and situation, balancing the current needs of the district and community while keeping the long-term fiscal sustainability in mind, adding back expenditures without consideration and understanding of the long-term fiscal impacts, closely monitoring student enrollment and planning, adjusting accordingly, which obviously Ray was here earlier, and that's something the district is already doing after we did it in the fall of 2022 as well. And then continued challenges of the per pupil formula, keeping up with inflation, and then, as I mentioned, current and future negotiations, and then changes in the legislative action. So, and then I had to put this on here. So, despite all the challenges the district has faced due to the pandemic and variables outside of its control, it continues to excel comparably. Go Trojans. So, all right, and I'll turn over for questions.
Thank you, Scott and David. Colleagues, any comments, questions? This is probably the time to get things clarified before we go into the special session where we are going to vote on the budget, right?
Yep.
Okay. Questions? Comments? No? I have two questions, Scott. There must be a reason why, when accountants and finance people put numbers in a table, there has to be a reason for everything. What are we learning from the LTFM numbers being in that general budget table? What is the purpose?
I think the point of that, and David can jump in too, is just to show we are a lucky district. We are a PAYGO district, so we're able to levy up for our LTFM, which is the reason that our buildings stay in such good shape. But the reason that we point that out is because it will fluctuate. So when we're going out, a year ahead and saying we're planning on spending $15 million, obviously pandemic hits, or there's other variables even now with supply chain issues or getting all the work done, as Director John Deutsch has been here talking about, like the constraints of trying to get it done over the summer. Our fiscal year ends June 30th, so that becomes a complicated issue. But there's a lot of variables that play into that. Because we are PAYGO, we can levy for it. Basically say we're getting the dollars, we receive the dollars, and then it reconciles over the two to 3 year period, and then those adjustments are. So the reason we put that in there is just because we want to keep the board and the community aware of that. And it's something that when David said it sat in that fund balance, it really is kind of a fake fund balance in that it's adjusted by the levies. So when you look at the financials and you see that 12 million and you're going, why are they continually, going up for LTFM dollars? Those are basically swiped by the state during the levy process. So it's just something that we want to bring to the board.
So really, when we are voting on the budget in that special session later on, we are not even considering that LTFM amount in that budget, right?
No. So we budgeted our regular 13 million, but we only budgeted 8 million in revenue because of that swing. So that's where I said it's kind of complicated because it's a cash flow issue. It's not a fund balance issue.
Okay, the second question I have is I looked at the cost containment data on the website, and I pulled the one for 24-25 school year. Can you, or maybe one of the directors, executive directors, I don't know if Dana or Stacy, who can clarify what the $842,000 in the middle school, the staffing reduction due to schedule change? Can somebody explain that? And also the $867,000 changing the staffing ratios in high school. So what does that really mean?
Might have to turn that over to Stacy, not to put you on the spot. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you for your good question. If I understand it correctly, I think you're just asking about the cost containment measures and dollars connected to our schedule changes.
Yes.
And so the dollars that you would see when we changed the schedule at the middle level, it took fewer teachers.
Okay.
Because we had the efficiencies with that schedule. And so that's the dollar amount that you're seeing. And then at the high school, remember, we didn't change the schedule. We just increased the class size. So their savings is just a reflection of the fact that we needed fewer teachers because we increased class size.
Okay, thank you. Spot on. Thank you. That's all I needed. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Perfect. I think I would just add to, obviously, these were difficult times, but the district did experiencing growth at the same time. So the number of staff that had to really feel kind of the consequences of the pandemic were mitigated because of that enrollment growth. So we still had to, in a lot of those times, and Director Voss could speak to it more than I could, but a lot of those people weren't let go. They were rather reassigned, or it was adjusted based on our enrollment growth. So if there was such a thing as a silver lining during a difficult time, that was probably something to mention.
All right. Any other? Paresh, go ahead.
Not a question, but comment. And Scott, I know we talked about it offline, but class sizes is one of the major concerns that we heard from community, right? And just looking at numbers, we have increased enrollment. If you look at the 2024-2025 cost containment, it's about 2.6, but now with our projected budget, the surplus is about 2.7. That doesn't mean that we don't have to do cost containment. And you put all the right reasons with data to show why we are doing what we are doing and how it has helped us in the last 2 to 3 years. So again, it's self-explanatory and obviously everyone can follow. But at the same time, how do we address some of the concerns that community has, right? So as we finalize the budget, and I know Stacy and others, you all are looking at it. So somewhere in our budgeting process, before we approve the final budget, if we talk about how we are looking at, managing those increased costs or class sizes without actually taking dollars away, if you will, right? 2.7 surplus, as I assigned, that's going to go in our reserve fund balance, which will push it probably more than 7%. So something to consider, but I think you guys are already looking at that plan, but it'll be advantageous and helpful for community to hear how we are addressing at the same time managing the balance and future risks.
Perfect. No, I think that's a great comment. I would just welcome Dr. Anderson or even Executive Director Stacy Voss. I know that we have already done things to mitigate class sizes even before this budget. And I think, as mentioned in one of the slides, as the needs come around, we will have absolutely, assuming all of these things in the budget come true, be able to address those issues with the current situation and financial health that we're slowly getting back to.
Yeah, I'll maybe just add a little bit to that as well, and then Stacy or Dana or maybe Nate will have some additional thoughts. But one of the things we just have to be cautious about, and we heard from our finance folks here tonight, we worked really hard the last 3 or 4 years to position for the longer term. We don't want to undo it all by too quickly reverting back to where we were 4, 5, 6 years ago. That could really spell more challenging years in front of us. So we really have a couple mechanisms, several probably, but the two main ones are to change the staffing ratio. That has an impact globally across the district. Just like when you increase it, it has an impact to save resources. As soon as you peel it back, it commits you to that level of staffing and determining class size ratios. I think, and I think others would concur, that the intermediate approach to bringing some relief to class sizes is to keep an eye on what we call our hotspot allocations. So those are teachers that we budget for that have not yet been assigned, and that we take into consideration the growth through the summer months and prior to when we open up the school year on the first day of school. And where we feel it's highest need, give consideration to assigning another teacher at that grade level in that building. So because we've been very methodical and been through some pain the last several years, we might be positioned to be able to be a little more flexible with some of those hotspot positions and or give consideration to adding some if we do have an influx of enrollment. I think that's the right plan for the coming school year, and then we can take a look at the staffing ratios for the longer term as we see a trend line that's demonstrating that stability, and we'll see what the state funding does as well. So I've said all along, and probably all in the room have heard me say it, focusing on that class size piece will be my highest priority as we get back to better times, and we're closer to that, I think. thanks to some great work by a large team. So hopefully that's helpful.
No, thank you. That's helpful. And again, it's good to hear there is flexibility, and obviously, if needed, we can look at some of those hotspots, if you will. So, no, thank you.
One more comment I wanted to make, Scott. I was looking at the cost containment data on the website as well. So compared to last year, which it was like 5.6 million, I believe, was the cost containment that was recommended and we approved. This year it's 2.6. So that's a very good progress, I would say. We are moving in the right direction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, that number was higher at some points. That's been a committee that's discussed that. It's not just individuals on the district staff, but it was something we, with our team and with the help of Dana and Stacy's team and Chase, we've been really watching all of those and had kind of work sessions, if you will, about what we could add back, what that would impact the bottom line. And as you know, I just always point out, and I don't mean to keep going back to it, but the budget is built off of assumptions, so it's something that we really need to watch. So it is fantastic that it appears that we are heading in the right direction, but as we know, there's variables that can change that very quickly. So not trying to be like, pouring water on it, but I just think it's important to note as well. So the district has worked extremely hard, and we've appreciated the support from the board and the community, but I think it's just something to keep in mind.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for all your hard work. It's really meant a lot, being fortunate to be on finance committee, hearing these reports and just seeing your diligence, throughout the, past several months and more. It really has been very valuable. So it's a long and difficult process, very draining process, I'm sure. But I'm, proud of the final product you guys have put together. And I look forward to, seeing its impact on the community, and it'll be very positive.
Perfect. Thank you for that comment. And it also, as Superintendent Anderson said, it helps to have a fantastic team. And I have, I would argue, the best finance team in the state. So probably shouldn't say things like that, but I truly believe it. And as Dr. Anderson mentioned too, just the collaboration with Human Resources Department with Stacy Voss and her team and Dana Miller and her team has been instrumental. So it takes everybody working together to make it work. So still have a long ways to go, but we feel like we're on a good path.
Thank you, Dan. I agree with Dan. Finance team has done a great job. Can we take a little bit of credit from the board side and thank the finance committee? They have done a fantastic job as well. So thank you, all of you. So
I should have added that. The finance committee of the board is fantastic, and I appreciate the communication because I know I bother them quite often, and I do appreciate their insight and historical perspective of the district and guiding us in those ways. So thank you very much.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, Scott. Thank you, David. There are no communications and community engagement reports today. So this completes our agenda for this evening. We will now take a 5-minute break, a stretch break, bathroom break, whatever you want to do in the 5 minutes, following which we will reconvene for a special regular meeting of the board. The time is now 6:45 p.m. The Wayzata Public School Board of Education work session for June 24th, 2024 is adjourned.